But within that polarity, there's a series of polarity. For instance, every time I come upon myself, I find myself in a very immediate polis or community, that of my family. Every time I come upon myself, there's Lynn, and there are my boys. I'm a part of a family. But then being in community, I say, has certain polarities, because I'm not simply a member of the family, I'm a member of a larger community, which I would really like to call the polis, that social web that is over and beyond the immediate community of the family. And this immediate community is defined in different ways, but today it has become the city. And then the polis is also that immediate community plus the practical universe that I live in. And I mean by the practical universe is that largest conception of community that I actually exist in and forge my responses out of. My point in this is to say that that community, which is beyond the family, and this side of the practical universe, which is the city, is that aspect of community that finally defines what it means to be an individual, what it means to be an individual within a family, what it means to be an individual within a practical universe. If that's hard for you to get on top of, in simple, what I'm saying is that the basic concept of community, which is defined by the category polis, is that which fundamentally determines the image of the individual, the image of the family, and the image of one's practical universe. And in our day, that image of the polis is being radically altered, which is necessitating a radical alteration of what it means to be an individual. It is changing the image. Waddling their way through the wastelands of a desert. I say these are humans minus one, just this side of naked self-consciousness, perhaps. And as they waddle through, there's Papa out in front who hadn't got the foggiest idea he's a Papa, followed by Mama who hadn't the slightest that she's a Mama, followed by sister and brother who wouldn't even know what you were talking about, called you them brothers and sisters. I say waddling through the wasteland, and sister collapses, dead as a dodo bird. And old Papa comes back and lifts her up, and she collapses. You see it in the slightest. He lifts her up, and she collapses. He slaps her in the face, and nothing happens. He kicks her, and not a budge. And finally, in desperation, he says, "Boys, wag her." So they pick her up, and they carry her for 3 days. And finally, the hot sun, well, the stink gets so bad, the Papa can't stand it any longer. And again, out of desperation, not out of any kind of concern, it's just that damn stink. He scratches out a hole in the ground and puts old sister in there. And then they cover her up just to get rid of that smell. But after they've covered her up and the smell has gone away, they go out and get some stones and put on top. Not to keep the wolves away. They didn't give a damn about the wolves. It was only the smell. But then something else. Here was the mystery of the mystery of the mystery of the mystery. Death. They didn't have the slightest. Here they were shoved up against the limits of being creatures. And they put those stones on there out of something that I might call a feeling of the weird or the awe-filled. And that was the first shrine. And pop, self-consciousness broke into history, perhaps. And then another company of humans minus one came by, and they saw the stones, and that reminded them of a happening that happened to them, but they stopped. And here was the beginning of the city. They discovered, as they met at a shrine, that two cubbies could gather more nuts to eat than one. And here began the marketplace, which was added to the shrine. And then they discovered that two cubbies could fight off more wolves than one. And here began the stronghold. And with the shrine and the marketplace and the stronghold began that strange journey of man from the first human settlement to this hour in which all of existence has become one great human settlement. What a march! We call that the civilizing process. And oh, what a history. At one time, the stronghold was the focal part of human togetherness in the polis. At another time, the marketplace. This came with the late Middle Ages in Western civilization, and that made the city of the bourgeois, or the burghers. And this is the only city that you and I, up to this moment, have known about. It's that city we've learned to hate. You know, we talk of the damn slums. No, I gotta swear here, because those goddamn slums, those narrow, dark streets, those paper-littered alleys, those uncovered garbage heads, that city that we hate, us little old bourgeois, have been fleeing out to the suburbs and and though you never lived in the midst of what I call the city now, you fled. You say, hell, I don't want to live there. But they're in the country. It's the city we've hated. But the city of the bourgeois is gone. And a brand new city is come into being. And the irony of it is that no one in the world can escape from living in that city. It's impossible. That's your fate. And you damn well got to make the best of it. I remember when this was first really jarred in my head is when I went to Germany, and I was living in Texas at the time. You know, us Texans look upon ourselves as quite cosmopolitan people and are able to kid ourselves till we get our great big old clodhoppers outside our country. And then we see how damn parochial we are. I remember a hard-headed Dutchman who smelled my naivete, took me outside of a town in Germany and told me to look south. I always think of Bavaria when I think of south in Germany, and when I think of Bavaria, I think of what I saw. The first thing on the horizon I saw was a church steeple. And around it was white cottages. And around the white cottages was a patchwork of fields with those gorgeous colors, you know, browns and yellows and oranges and greens. Oh, there was the pastoral, the rustic, the agrarian, the rural pattern of existence. That steeple right in the center, people living around that symbol of the eternal, and then working around their houses. I tell you, there was the rustic mindset. It's the kind of mindset I guess I thought Europe ought to always have. I'm the kind of a naive person that, though I wouldn't be caught dead in an outside privy unless I had to be caught dead in an outside privy, I always thought that Europe ought to remain the way it was pictured in those romantic novels that I studied in high school English. You know, I didn't think they ought to improve. They still ought to use outdoor privies and, well, anyway, that was the picture when I looked south toward Bavaria. I saw the medieval world. Then he told me to look north, and you know what I think of when I think of north in Germany. I damn well didn't see any church steeple. You know what I saw? Great big smokestacks. And there weren't any white cottages, just a great big black blob. Sort of like Los Angeles when the smoke is in, and you come in from an airplane. This is a great big old black glob down there with mountains sticking out of the top of it. And no patchwork field, just that black glob had faded out into a circle of gray glob. And there was the technological, industrial, urban world that was here. And then he jarred me to see that that was the kind of a world that I was going to live in. And that I no longer could pretend that if I just kept my head hidden in the sand long enough, that nasty old concept of human settlement would go away. He even broke some of my illusions that I thought that I could be a knight on a white charger that would come in and do away with this nasty old new means of human settlement. No. The problem that he drove into my skull was not how do I get rid of it or how do I get out of it, both of which are impossible. But the question was, what in the hell does it mean to be a human being within the midst of it?
This is to say that the urban revolution is not geographical. It's a mindset
in which the rural mindset has utterly been replaced by the urban mindset. And I think this has to do with our feel after space, with our feel after time, with our feel after personal relations, and with our feel after of how we root ourselves in the great evolutionary process itself. And let me see if I can quickly illustrate what I mean. And to do that, I need to go back to Ado, Ohio, where I grew up. Now that term Ado, the sound Ada, the sound of it is exactly the way the town was. As a matter of fact, it was such a small place that in our insecurity, we put a great big sign out along the Pennsylvania Railroad, which made Ada a flag stop. We put a big sign out there, the biggest little town in all the world. That was Ada. And I tell you, in Ada, we had a great deal of external space and very little internal space. External space, there was Grass Run about 1.5 miles out to the south. Hawk Creek was about 1.75 miles. Ringe Grove was about 3/4 out to Lafayette was out in the other, it was just a crossroads, 3 or 4 miles out. I tell you, we had space, and we breathed well in Ada. We had lots of breathing space, but our interior space, our psychological space, was awful there. Now you take Lima, Ohio. It was just 16 miles away. It was nothing more than an overgrown village. We thought of it as a thriving metropolis. And when our family would go to Lima, Mama, she would announce it 2 months ahead of time. And we would plot and plan and scheme and intrigue about this long journey down the Lima Pike to that great metropolis of Lima. Do you get the feel after that? That was a historic occasion in our existence. I tell you, we had very little breathing space down inside. Our horizons were narrow. We were parochial in Ada, Ohio. To be parochial is a part of the rural mindset. That's what I was describing when I went to Europe there. I took a little Ada with me. As a matter of fact, I don't know how to put this to you, but we had one Negro person in town. And for us people, hell, they were like a hyena in a zoo. We thought they were sort of our pet. That we could show up and look. In those days we called them coons in Ada. This was a part of our parochialism. Roman Catholics, we didn't have very many Roman Catholics there. And I tell you, a Roman Catholic was almost like an exhibit. We all knew that Roman Catholics were wrong. That they kissed the fanny, the king of the ring of the Pope. We didn't know what awful things they did in there on Sunday on those nights. Now, of course, we in Ada, we were sort of excited about having those folks here, but we knew they were damn fools. Nothing would have And I say our space was very, very narrow. I tell you, in those days, when a missionary came from India or Africa, and especially if it was what we called a lady from those countries, the whole town turned out, which was a reflection of that kind of narrow. Now in the city, it's quite different. Hell, external space in Chicago, we have not. It's flesh upon flesh upon flesh. I tell you, we have a kind of external togetherness there that's very amazing. But in terms of the interior space, laws are massive. If I got a call from one of the girls where I worked that tomorrow I had to be in Tokyo, that wouldn't come anywhere near as the exciting surprise as when Mama announced to her 7 children that in 2 months we were going to Lima to see Cousin William and Cousin Alice. That is to say, the world belongs to me today. Not because it's good. What I'm trying to say is, hell, I just can't help myself. That explosion in Africa is my business. Not because I think it's great, but because that's my world. And that explosion that's going to take place in 5 years, within 5 years in South America, that's my damn business. Again, not because that's good or bad, because that's my universe. I cannot help it. My breathing space inside literally covers the globe. It's almost as if to live in the city today is that there aren't any more parochialism. That is to say that now the damn Protestant that sees the Catholic as a freak himself has become a freak. Do you understand that? The narrow-minded white man that sees the Negro as something to be held off like this, hell, he has become the ass in the midst. Not because that's good or bad. I'm not talking about whether it's good or bad to love the Negro. Not even interested in that. What I mean is parochialism is gone, and the best way to become a parochial horse's ass is to try to deny the fact. Do I communicate what I mean? The same is true about a European. The same is true really about a communist. We kid ourselves at this point, but inside us, the walls have been broken down in a way that would even make Paul tremble when he said, oh, as a matter of fact, another wall that's gone down is the feminine revolution. And whether we men like it or not, or think it's good or not, the women have decided to be first-rate citizens in the great arena of human history. I tell you, we have scope, but this is not simply geographic. It's historical. That is, when I look back into the past, there's nothing alien. There's nothing foreign there. It's all my past. See? All of the people there are my friends. See? There are none that are simply alien. I am history. I am not this history. I am all of history. Do you understand what I said? I am all of history, minus none. And when I take a look into the future, there's nothing alien there. Nothing can happen that could be foreign to me. I am the future. That's what I mean by the new breathing space that has come. I say again, not good or bad. It's just there in terms of the rural mindset, which was narrow and parochial, being broken open by the urban mindset. We have a new sense of space. Now, if you want to get what I'm pushing at, if you act otherwise, what I'm saying to you is that you are saying no to just what's there as your life. But in Ada, the same thing was true of time. Time always has a beat to it, doesn't it? The beat in Ada, the rhythm was something like this. Oh, I can remember it very clearly. We wouldn't have known what was going on if we'd seen the West Side Story. You understand? Now, the beat or the rhythm or the sense of internal time in life has to do with decisions. And in Ada, decisions, they came along every once in a while. That is, today we made a decision. 2 or 3 days later, we had another decision to make. A few days later, there was a damn decent rhythm to life. Us rural people had sort of got used to this. My gracious, you take old Leroy Brown, who lived out there on the Lima Pike, but going the other way from Ada. I think he lived out about 2 miles. See. When it came time for him to get married, Leroy didn't have much problem at all. He finally married, and I can't think of her name, but she lived about 3/4 of a mile on down, over the on the other side of the road in a farm. And maybe there was one other girl, but hell, Leroy didn't have any problem. You know, he's just maybe 1 or 2 girls. I'm quite sure he went up to that girl, let's call her Alice, and said, Alice, I've fallen in love with you. Well, won't you marry me? Wasn't our marriage written in heaven? You see, Leroy didn't have much of a problem. Now you take, even when I got married, I got an elevator. And those 10 or 12, well, those 2 or 3 girls. But you see, the problem in that is that when you say yes to this filly rather than that one, hell, I tell you, this is the burden of your freedom. First of all, well, the next day, she isn't going to be the one you said yes to the night before. They don't stay the same. And then secondly, what you might have been had you married Flo, hell, you'd never be that. You're groomed, you're channeled, and this is the burden of freedom. And I tell you, you take my 17-year-old boy, hell, he brings more fillies around the house. They all look good to me. And he hasn't even been to college yet. I don't know how in the hell he's going to decide it. That's what I mean. And yet it's not the pressure of the many alternatives. It's in the urban mindset today. You experience life as one decision pushing in on the next one, pushing in on, as one fellow put it, life in the urban mentality, one damn decision after another. You understand that you know sometimes when you find yourself hitting the sack a little earlier, just trying to blot out something, you don't know what in the hell you're trying to blot out. What I like to suggest is these decisions that come at you. And yet I haven't really gotten to the point of it yet. It's as if in the urban mentality, it's not one decision after another. There's a complexity of decisions in every decision you make. One of you characters out here today saying, well, wouldn't it just be best to blot out this lucidity and crawl back into some kind of a shell? Yes, that's one way in which you do it. You set up a parochialism that is a self-made parochialism. That is, you build an illusion to live in, to cut out this horrible experience of having to make one complex decision after one more complex decision, and damn it, you're going to die in this kind of a world. I say the problem is not how you get out of it, but how you're going to live it. The age of anxiety wasn't here just for 10 years, as we like to pretend to ourselves. The whole new urban mindset, from the perspective of the rural mindset is just one great big age of anxiety. And to be a person, you're either going to choose to live in the midst of that as a lucid person, or you're going to give up selfhood and get yourself some slob to marry that will help prop you up while you waddle in your illusion to your grave. These are the 2 choices that you have. I don't say this is good. I just say, hell, that's your life. And the third thing that I think points to the radical alteration in human settlement, and therefore in the very style of life, has to do with human relations. Now again, you take Ada. Mrs. Ridgway lived next door to us. I tell you, we had real intimate relations there. Mrs. Ridgway had my mama's permission to spank me. I tell you, we were intimate in Ada. And we called her Annie Ridgway. Hell, she wasn't related to me, especially when she was spanking me. but we had real face-to-face relationships. You know, we could have, it wasn't written then, we could have perverted Buber's I thou, the way I hear people all over the country perverting it, as if I'm an I out here and over there's a thou, and we worry it up together to become I thou. You get this? This is to say that the Christian understanding of love was reduced to the rural mindset in which love was this face-to-face relations in which I make a gentleman's agreement with her that I'll not ask upsetting questions of her, she doesn't of me, and we'll be real nice to each other, and we'll not puncture each other's allusions, and whenever two people get into a creative dialogue, I'll move in and I'll say, oh, if we just understood each other, you would like each other, or way down underneath, you'd see that you were saying the same thing. That's what I mean by the rural conception of love, some kind of face-to-face relationship. But in the new urban mentality, that's gone forever and forever and forever, just period. There aren't any face-to-face relationships in terms of the new urban mindset. You live right up on top of people that you haven't got the slightest, and you aren't going to get the slightest, and you could try to bring old Ada's conception of Mrs. Ridgway there, and it would no more fit than it would fit on the other side of the moon. What I'm trying to say is that human relations have been utterly retooled, like space and like time have been retooled. Communities of mutuality are no longer geographical in the urban mindset. Even in Chicago, if I wanted to get my community of mutuality together, they'd have to travel for 50 miles. But even that doesn't get to it. My spirit community in this world are spread all over the world. I sat down in Los Angeles, and there I look into the eyes of a spirit brother. I moved halfway around the world, and there is my spirit sister. And in terms of this new field, it's almost as if time has stood still. We pick up from where we were. The community of mutuality spreads over geography in terms of the world becoming one great city. No longer is it a matter of the next door neighbor whose name is Mrs. Ridgway. Mrs. Ridgway may live at the other end of the country. And the new conception of love within the city is justing love, not the love of mutuality. This is to say that in the new urban mindset, the only way that you can love your neighbor is to be out giving your life for the sake of the structures of civilization which minister unto your neighbor. Now see if I can illustrate that. When I first went to Chicago about 2 years ago, we had to take that city to pieces, street by street, and socio-political structure by socio-political structure, and put it back together again in order to have some unparochial conception of what our mission to Chicago could be. And when we were doing that, it seems to me I was driven up and down 1 million streets, and on each street there seemed to be 1 million tall buildings, and in each building almost 1 million windows. And behind every window a face. I remember one time I was being driven through one of the fingers of the ghetto called Inglewood. And as I went by, I looked up on the 3rd floor window, and there a Negro woman's face just went by. Just went by the window, and that's all I saw. But that night, in the middle of the night, I was awakened by a light question. And the question was, Joseph, what in the hell does it mean to love that Negro woman whose face you saw flit that window and which you'll never see again? Do you understand that? I didn't put that question to life. Life put it to me. And then I was jarred to be awakened under the fact that I had to decide what in the hell it meant to love those millions of faces that I would never see in the city of Chicago. Now in Ada, I tell you, it was something different. We knew everybody in town, and everybody had a role. Hell, there was the town drunk. We called him Slim. Ada couldn't have been Ada without old Slim. Slim had himself a role. I tell you, he was in the web of face-to-face relations. There was Kenneth Clayball. He wasn't quite right. He was defective. But I tell you, Kenneth was a part of Ada. He had a role that he played in the midst of it. Chicago is different. The urban mindset is different. What would it mean to minister under Slim and to minister under Kenneth Clayball in the city of Chicago? What I'm suggesting to you, you've got no way under God's heaven to care for people, save that you give yourself for the sake of structures, breaking loose the past structures and forging new ones that more adequately minister unto humanness in scope and in depth. The only way I could love that woman down in Inglewood was to move into there and break. Oh, you don't realize it, but in the part of Chicago that I live in, do you know that we sent to Congress an 84-year-old white man, 97% Negro where I live, an 84-year-old white man who had been in a wheelchair for 5 years and who died on the day we elected him? Do you know that? Now, what in the hell would it mean to love that Negro woman in Inglewood? You couldn't even begin to talk about it, save you move out and interfere with the structures of justice for the sake of building more adequate structures of justice. Now, you little old urban-minded folk that are pretending you're still living out in some kind of a rural community, you wake up. And you may be able to conceal from yourself that you are a human being in history by reducing Christian love into some kind of nice little old face-to-face relationships. But that's exactly what love is not. In the midst of the 20th century, for the sentinel man or for the man of faith. Don't you dare talk to me about loving anyone, save you're out there expending your death at the very edge of the civilizing process that works for the well-being of mankind. That's the difference between the rural mindset and the urban mindset in our day, where it has to do with human relations. And the last thing that I want to point to in terms of this oration has to do with rootage. I don't quite know how to put this, but I have to go back to Ada again. I have to go back to my papa. I buried him a couple of years ago. He was 92 years old. And almost all of Papa's life, at least during the lifetime of his 3 boys, he was irritated at us. And he was irritated at us because we didn't seem to give a damn about the past that was so damned important to him. Do you know that he could not only name all his first cousins by name, but he could name his second cousins and his third cousins, and he could tell you how they were intertwined way back there? Why, hell, I'd have a hard time naming my first cousin. And my boy, oh my Lord, it's pitiful. Lynn decided that she hadn't shown off her 3 boys to her folks out in the East Coast for a long time, and this last summer, we just decided to take them out. She just decided to take them out there. And I was going to a conference, and I wrote them all away. And I remember we were coming into Norwich, New York, where we got some relatives. And the 3 boys were in the back seat. And old Lynn, now boys, this is your Aunt Alice and your Uncle Alex. It is not Aunt Elizabeth, and that's not Uncle Arthur. And the name of your cousins here are Jonathan and so on. Then she turned, Joe, I want to hear you name your cousins, see? And we were rehearsing. And she'd tell him, now the tallest one, he's Alex. That middle one, he's somebody, I couldn't have even, hell, I didn't even know. Do you see what I mean? Papa was rooted in his history. As a matter of fact, Aunt Maggie Matthews, that's my great-great-grandmother, she was a historical event in Papa's life. She wasn't any in mine at all. She was a pioneer woman, probably no record of her birth and no record of her death. She wasn't any event in mine, but for Papa, she was a historical Well, one time I got nostalgic and decided I'd try to see where her grave was, and she was buried in the Huntersville Cemetery. That is about 2 miles south of Ada. Then you'd turn east for about 2 miles, and then you'd have to turn back up north about a half a mile, There used to be an old church, Hellenic Church, there anymore, and that grass, I felt like it was about that high, but I experienced it like this, going through that grave. And then those tombstones, in Ada, they made tombstones out of that soft sandstone. Hell, they don't last at all. And the broken over, slapped down. I go looking. I never did find the grave of Aunt Maggie Matthews. And that didn't come. That would have killed Pop. I'm glad he died, before I had a chance to disclose that to him. He was ruined in his past. That was the rural mindset. And that was the mindset that man had lived in from the very beginning of human settlement to this very hour that you and I live in. But man is no more rooted there. You find the sentinel individual on the college, I'm not talking about the Slavs. Hell, I know there are Slavs on college campuses, and by a Slav I mean those who can't face their life and have to create some kind of an illusion about the way life is for themselves. But you go to a college campus today, the sentinel individuals, they are not rooted backward, they're rooted forward. That is to say, their sense of attachment to history is in terms of the kind of a world that they have to bring into being. Do you understand that? The world that they create is where their anchors are. I don't know as to whether or not you're clear about that, but when you want to get a hold of the stuff that anchors an awakened student in history, it's what he's going to do in history. It's what he has to do in history. It's the kind of a world he's going to create that finally gives him his rootage in the midst of life. And that isn't good or bad, that's just the way it is. And the individual today has no way of forging a model, an image of being an individual, except in the context that I have described for you. He is going to be, if authenticity is going to be in his very core of his being, he's going to be the utterly unparochial person. If you've got little private axes to grind against the Roman, against the Buddhist, against the Frenchman, against the Chinese communist, against the black man, and you live in those, all you're doing is saying no to your situation in history today. The second thing to be an authentic person is to live in the midst of a horrifying anxiety of having to make complex decisions that would have rattled the teeth of your mother and your father. And the third thing it means to be a human individual in our day is to live in concern for the neighbor that can only be manifest in terms of altering the structures that minister unto the human well-being of all mankind. You've got no other way to do it. And lastly, it's to self-consciously root yourself in the kind of a world that you have to build. And you've got no other rootage. Once the medieval universe passed away, you've got no rootage in the past. You will only root yourself in terms of picking up the civilizing process and creating the kind of a world that you demand this world be, and in that activity you create the very roots of your being. Now, E. Cummings in one of his poems said there's a hell of a good universe next door, let's go. Well, I think that the decision facing anyone who's going to be an authentic person is just this. The urban worldview that defines the kind of a style that you have to forge is here. And you either live in that world or you try to stop the world and get off. But you never get it stopped. It simply grinds you underneath and ushers you to the 6-foot hole in the ground as one who never lived. Now, mark you, I did not make this world, and neither did you. But that's the world you and I are cast in. To be a man of faith, to be a man who is in Jesus Christ, is to be the man who picks up his world, the one who has cosmic permission to live in the world that's his and live it to the hilt. Don't you wish the church could have kept on sleeping for another 100 years till you died? I'm through.
Translate that for me. The man who stands at the edge of life and therefore sees the givenness of his life as it is and picks up that life is the one who operates in the awareness that this is the meaning of his life. This is the meaning of his life. This is what I mean by cosmic permission. And this permission is uttered precisely by that cadre of people who have picked up their life. They announce to all men that the meaning of life is to pick up your life as a gift and live it. That's what I mean by cosmic permission.
Miss Matthews, I wish you'd speak a little bit about what you mean by faith, please, as you work with imitation.
I mean by faith everything I said since I've been here. But to put it in terms of get on theological language, faith for me is a relational category. The term faith points to a relationship, like the term friendship points to a relationship. And the relationship that the category faith points to is the ultimate relationship in and through which a person chooses to define themselves. For instance, if your mother is the meaning of your life, then that relationship to your mother is a faith relationship. Do you see that? Or if your nation is the meaning of your life, then the category faith points to that relationship you have to your nation, in which your nation becomes your ultimate, and therefore you are defined in terms of that relationship to your nation. Now, within the Hebrew Christian community, we use faith in a very technical way, which is to say that that relationship in and through which a person defines themselves before the final mystery that's there in life is the faith relationship. And to define yourself before this mystery is to pick up your life, your givenness, as a great gift and to creatively live it. Did that get anything? The man of faith is the man who lives at the edge of his life before the mystery. And in living there, finds his being, which is to say that relationship is the ultimate relationship of his life. Therefore, he's always the comprehensive man, the futuric man, and the affirmative man. Anybody?
I understand what you are saying. You say a man has to live this life now, and he has to be realistic about it. He has to make the best of what he's got. He has to be creative. But why Christ? I mean, suppose I were an atheist or I were somebody who had never heard Jesus Christ or anybody else, and I walked in this room and heard you. I could agree with everything you said up until the point that you said belief in Christ, and it's through Christ that you find this creative ability to live now. Why not something else?
Now let me see if I can't take your question and put it in terms of the 20th century world we live in, and see if you would subscribe to it. Now the way I would hear your question as a man in the 20th century would be like this. Joseph, what verifiable notmeanness do you point to with the verbal sign CHRIST? Would you accept that as your question?
I understand what you said to say yes. why, okay, yes.
You would.
Well,
I don't have to go back and rehearse the fact that Christ was not the last name of a guy named Jesus, do I? Do I? You're all quite aware of this. Therefore, if the term Christ is a title, like Harry Truman, the President, Joshua, the Christ, then you're after what that term Christ points to, what the title points to. Therefore, in the 20th century, I take it your question, if you're going to use language as a 20th century man, is what do you mean to point to with a verbal sign C-H-R-I-S-T that I can see?
that's exactly right.
All right, then if that's your question, I'd answer. Otherwise, I'd reject your question because I'd have to live in a universe I don't live in order to answer your question, which means I wouldn't be answering your question at all. I'd be playing an abstract game with you. All right, now what I mean to point to, the term C-H-R-I-S-T, is a happening, is a going on, is an event that has to do with my life. And it's this kind of an event. Here's one event. Now that event was not simply my conking her on the head, but it was her interpretation, like, I wonder what that old goat's doing. I point to a going on that has to do with my life. It looks like this. In this configuration of circumstances, which throws me out of my illusions about life into exposure to the actual going onness of what life is all about. At that moment, when I stand before the great mystery, I recollect out of my memory that was placed there by a strange community of history called the church, that I can dare to live before that last final reality. Which word that I can dare to live before this reality does not mean true, but is a question that forces me to make a decision as to whether or not I'm going to live there exposed or to conjure up another illusion to live in. When I decide that that word that I can live there is the word that defines my life, which is the relationship of faith, when I decide that, that's what I mean by the Christ happening. That happening in my life in which I am utterly turned about from hiding from the way life is to being exposed to the way life is. That's what I mean by the Christ happening.
You said that for man there are two choices in life. You can take either the Nietzsche Sartre idea of denying life completely, or you can go out, as you said, take your death and thrust it into the breach of existence. Is that in effect the two choices which you've offered to us?
Well, yes, only I think that if you put Sartre and Nietzsche as the ones who decided negatively, you haven't read them very well. Well, okay. Yes, I think that at the edge of life, you either live in the Christ happening, which is the affirmation of life, and the affirmation of your being in the actual world in which you live, or you negate it.
Well then, why do you say that one is better than the other?
What, did I say that?
Well, you're saying, you have implied to me at least, that it is better to affirm life than to deny it.
My affirmation of life is that which pours content into my affirmation.
Well, why is that better than just simply denying life?
It isn't. That's what I meant to say. The very affirmation is the center of value out of which I make my decisions of good or bad.
Well, why not just deny life and deny good?
Fine. I have no quarrel with that. I have no quarrel with that at all. And when you decided to deny life, you would not be denying life. This, for you, would be the affirmation of life. This is what you mean by an illusion. You understand that, don't you?
You mean there's no other alternative, there's nothing you can do?
No, not if you put it into the raw decision. You remember Kierkegaard devised the way we negate life into three different general categories. One, you negate it in sheer naivete, and the other one, you deny it in terms of introversion. Huh?
This is still affirmation.
For the man within him, this is the way life is.
Well, the whole idea is that you've been presenting to us is just so pessimistic. I just don't see where the good comes in at all. And there has to be good in man, or else why live at all?
Well, now, let me think here just a little bit. If I say, you understand this, I think. If I say that X is better than Y, that's a nonsensical statement.
I think all things are relative.
Okay, then to say that man is good or has some good in him, which is probably worse, that's a nonsensical statement in itself. Do you see why it is?
Well, they say nothing is good or evil, but thinking makes it so, and I believe this to a certain degree, but...
No, I don't want to get into that. I don't really see that when you say X is better than B, or that X has more B in it than Y has B in it, which is the same statement, man has some good in it. You do not see why that's a nonsensical statement.
Yes, I do.
All right, tell me why.
I'm telling you why I said something wrong. Okay, well...
No, just why that's that you see that's a nonsensical statement.
Well, possibly because we have no definition of the word good.
Oh, yes. Oh, dear Becky, that's tremendous. When I say A is better than B, that's nonsensical until I disclose the center of value. That is that card up my sleeve. Because though A is better than B relative to C, everybody knows that B is better than A relative to D. Now you see that?
No.
Well, then you didn't understand then what you said. So when you make a valuational statement, you always have a center of value, about which you do not make a judgment of good and evil. That is that by which you judge anything good or evil. If I say this chair is better than that one, I've got a third term out here by which I make that statement. Now, when you come to the dimension of life that I'm talking about, you are down past this good and evil. You're at the way you are going to make your decision about the way life is that enables you to talk about good and evil. I guess you don't see what I mean by that. If you give me 3 good reasons why A is better than B, I am not interested in your calling A better than B. What I'm interested in is where the hell you got those 3 good reasons. And if you give me 3 good reasons why those are 3 good reasons why A is better than B, I'm not interested in your first 3 good reasons. I'm interested in where you got the second 3 good reasons. Now, when you come to the edge of life, where you decide yea or nay in terms of affirming life as it is given, you are not doing this in terms of some criteria. You are making a decision out over 40,000 fathoms of nothingness. That is to say, you're deciding how you're going to live your life and die your death. And then in that context, you talk about good and evil. And that's just the human situation. And if you don't see that, then, to me, you're still living in the naivete of a second-hand universe that your mama gave you. Please.
Well, you talked about the complexity of the world we lived in 1964 is different from 50 or 100 years ago. And you also quoted John Donne. Now, you contend that John Donne's interpretation of the human situation, either as a poet or as an Anglican priest, which he also was, are not applicable to people in this room in 1964?
No, very much so. And if you went back further, you'd have it would become far more clear. But you raised the question of historical methodology. And if you take a man in the medieval universe, take a medieval mystic, or you can take Socrates. If you're going to discover how you carry on a dialogue with him, then you've got 4 impossibilities.
It's something like this. You have to shed the skin of a 20th century man, which you cannot do. Take on the skin of one who lived 4 centuries before Christ, which you cannot do. And when you do that, which you cannot do, you have to look in the direction he's pointing from where he's standing at the verifiable not meanness that he's indicating. Then you've got to shed the skin of that century, which you cannot do because you couldn't get it on. Take on the skin of the 20th century, which you cannot do because you never got it off. And then you look at that verifiable object out there and see what terminology you use to indicate it. And then, and only then, do you really carry on a communication with, say, Mr. Socrates. That's the historical methodology today. And it's just that complicated. You cannot look at a painting in the Middle Ages of, say, a flat figure of Christ with some kind of circle around his head and understand what they were speaking about. Say you go through that kind of sympathetic imaginative process I described. Yes, please.
I decided I don't like to answer the answer you gave to my previous question. Now that I think about it, you sort of circumlocuted. You said that there were two ways of facing life, affirming it or denying it. And then you said that to deny it was one way of affirming it. Yet, and so in other words, man can only affirm life. Yet later on you talked in terms of people like Medgar Evers and other people who do positive things to put their life, as you say, into the breach of history. And you've also talked to people who don't do that, who try to make themselves, even though it's impossible, an island, apart from the rest.
Well, let's come to your first one. You see, I did not say what you heard me say, that the person who negates life, he affirms it. I said from inside his negation, he experiences affirmation of it. The purpose of an illusion is to conceal from ourselves the fact that we are living in an illusion.
Well,
from where I stand, you've doggone right. He negates life, and therefore he never lives. And he takes within his illusion the built-in memory of what I point to as the affirmation of life that comes out through the form of ulcers, anxieties, excessive sweating under the arms.
Or then, in other words, you yourself do not agree with the idea of negating life.
Oh, my existence, my very existence, every bit of it is in terms of receiving this mystery in life as my God.
But when you see someone else negating or denying life, do you approve or disapprove?
Well, very obviously, I disapprove.
Why? In other words, as you asked her, what are your standard of values? Why is one better or worse than the other?
I just gave it to you.
Do it again, please.
Who I am in life is the relationship to the mystery that gives me my life as it is. That's my beginning point, my ending point, my alpha and my omega. That's who I am.
All right, but what's wrong with someone else denying the existing, the beginning, and the ending?
Well, if what you were saying that you want to deny it, I have nothing to say to you.
But you just said a minute ago that you didn't like that.
Well, that's right, and I am going to give you a hard time all my life. But you see, I can't live your life for you. You alone have to decide this, and it's not an intellectual question. It's your existence you're talking about.
But the point I'm trying to get at is, in other words, you have established a set of values of one thing being better than the other, of affirmation being better than negation.
Yes, if you mean by establishing an evaluational center through my death, yes.
Well, I'm trying to find out why basically you feel that you are right or better in affirming than denying.
Well, you see, if you're asking for 3 good reasons, and all you're asking me is to say that I am something other than what I tell you I am.
No, I'm not asking that. I'm trying to find out your reasoning for believing that what you think you are is right.
Well, you see, I can't answer your question because I have to be somebody else other than who I am in order to give you 3 good reasons why I have, so to speak, bet my existence on receiving my existence as good.
Well, then taking this, why should we feel or go along with the idea of Christianity?
Oh, I don't think you should. My Lord, I don't know what should mean.
Well,
My friend Luther one time stood at his pulpit and he said to people, when you got born, I was not there. When you get died, I'll not be there. When I got born, you weren't there. When I get died, you'll not be there. Every man has to do his living and dying alone. Don't you understand that? You have to decide how you're going to live your life. This isn't some abstract game as to how you arrive at the concept of the good. Your life is at stake, and you go around the clock once, not twice, just once.
then in other words, a man is an island. Or another man can't help another man.
Well, I don't follow your reasoning. I don't find myself an island because my existence is my relationships. Every time I come upon myself, I find myself in relationship. But I have no awareness of being who I am outside of being an urban man.
But if a man has to do his own living and his own dying, then doesn't that imply that he can't have any help in doing the one or the other?
No, and I'm a little afraid that you're saying that has to do his own living and dying. I'm afraid the way you're using it. I want to make a descriptive statement. You do. Did you ever try to help someone die?
No.
Well, I have. What I'm trying to tell you, you can't help. They just got it. I remember I had a Marine who had his testicles shot off in my lap and he died. And hell, how do you help a man die? Give him a cigarette, quote the 23rd Psalm, say the Lord's Prayer? How do you help a man die?
Can you help a man live?
Well, of course not.
Then why do we have ministers and preachers?
Well, I don't know. You tell me.
Well, because I think you can help a man.
But how? Tell me how.
Well, we were talking about life in terms of relationships and recollections. Not recollections so much as relationships. I think one man can help another establish relationships.
All right, fine.
Then a man can help another live.
No, not for me.
Well, what are you talking about when you say that you've got to do something about the urban mindset? I mean, it's there, you've got to accept it. You said that, didn't you?
Right.
And you're trying to encourage people to accept the urban mindset.
Okay, go on.
I don't know whether I can, but there are millions of people who will be in the rural mindset until they die.
Not anymore.
You don't think so?
Oh, not a man in the world is in the rural mindset. But go ahead. I'll even play with you if there is. To get your question out.
Don't you think that there are millions of people who are parochially minded?
There are what?
Millions of people who are parochially minded?
Yes, but the difference in Ada being parochial was being unparochial. You see, we're in a world today. But that's not where your question was. Go on. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned India earlier today. Now there you have big cities, but this doesn't necessarily mean that people are urban-minded, does it?
Oh, when I was in India, my heavens, people way out in the villages, they knew about the world and really didn't know in our time. Same is true of the bush country.